the hour of sunset was near, for a good deal of time had passed while he was within. When he came out, he sat down with us again, but not much was said. Soon the jailer entered and stood by him, saying, "To you, Socrates, whom I know to be the noblest and gentlest and best of all who ever came to this place, I will not impute the angry feelings of other men who rage and swear at me when, in obedience to the authorities, I bid them drink the poison. Indeed, I am sure that you will not be angry with me, for others, as you are aware, and not I, are the guilty cause. And so fare you well, and try to bear lightly what must needs be. You know my errand." Then, bursting into tears, he turned away and went out. Socrates looked at him and said, "I return your good wishes, and will do as you bid." Then, turning to us, he said, "How charming the man is! Since I have been in prison, he has always been coming to see me, and now see how generously he sorrows for me. But we must do as he says, Crito. Let the cup be brought, if the poison is prepared. If not, let the attendant prepare some." "Yet," said Crito, "the sun is still upon the hilltops, and many a one has taken the draught late. And after the announcement has been made to him, he has eaten and drunk, and indulged in sensual delights. Do not hasten, then, there is still time." Socrates said, "Yes, Crito, and they of whom you speak are right in doing thus, for they think that they will gain by the delay. But I am right in not doing thus, for I do not think that I should gain anything by drinking the poison a little later. I should be sparing and saving a life which is already gone. I could only laugh at myself for this. Please, then, to do as I say, and not to refuse me." Crito, when he heard this, made a sign to the servant, and the servant went in and remained for some time, and then returned with the jailer carrying the cup of poison. Socrates said, "You, my good friend, who are experienced in these matters, shall give me directions how I am to proceed." The man answered, "You have only to walk about until your legs are heavy, and then to lie down, and the poison will act." At the same time, he handed the cup to Socrates, who in the easiest and gentlest manner, without the least fear or change of color or feature, looking at the man with all his eyes, as his manner was, took the cup and said, "What do you say about making a libation out of this cup to any god? May I or not?" The man answered, "We only prepare, Socrates, just so much as we deem enough." "I understand," he said, "yet I may and must pray to the gods to prosper my journey from this to that other world. May this, then, which is my prayer, be granted to me." Then, holding the cup to his lips, quite readily and cheerfully, he drank the poison. And hitherto most of us had been able to control our sorrow, but now, when we saw him drinking, and saw too that he had finished the draught, we could no longer forbear, and in spite of myself my own tears were flowing fast, so that I covered my face and wept over myself. For certainly I was not weeping over him, but at the thought of my own calamity in having lost such a companion. Nor was I the first, for Crito, when he found himself unable to restrain his tears, had got up and moved away, and I followed. And at that moment Apollodorus, who had been weeping all the time, broke out into a loud cry which made cowards of us all. Socrates alone retained his calmness. "What is this strange outcry?" he said. "I sent away the women mainly in order that they might not offend in this way, for I have heard that a man should die in peace. Be quiet, then, and have patience." When we heard that, we were ashamed and restrained our tears, and he walked about until, as he said, his legs began to fail, and then he lay on his back according to the directions, and the man who gave him the poison now and then looked at his feet and legs. And after a while he pressed his foot hard and asked him if he could feel, and he said no, and then his leg, and so upwards, and showed us that he was cold and stiff. And then Socrates felt them himself, and said, "When the poison reaches the heart, that will be the end." He was beginning to grow cold about the groin, when he uncovered his face, for he had covered himself up, and said, they were his last words, "Crito, I owe a cock to Asclepius. Will you remember to pay the debt?" "The debt shall be paid," said Crito. "Is there anything else?" There was no answer to this question, but in a minute or two a movement was heard, and the attendant uncovered him. His eyes were set, and Crito closed his eyes and mouth. Such was the end of our friend, whom I may truly call the wisest, the justest, and best of all the men whom I have ever known. The preparation of Plato. Plato's meeting with Socrates had been a turning point in his life. He had been brought up in comfort, and perhaps in wealth. He was a handsome and vigorous youth, called Plato, it is said, because of the breadth of his shoulders. He had excelled as a soldier, and had twice won prizes at the Isthmian Games. Philosophers are not apt to develop out of such an adolescence, but Plato's subtle soul had found a new joy in the dialectic game of Socrates. It was a delight to behold the master deflating dogmas and puncturing presumptions with the sharp point of his questions. Plato entered into this sport as he had in a coarser kind of wrestling, and under the guidance of the old gadfly, as Socrates called himself, he passed from mere debate to careful analysis and fruitful discussion. He became a very passionate lover of wisdom and of his teacher. I thank God, he used to say, that I was born Greek and not barbarian, freeman and not slave, man and not woman, but above all that I was born in the age of Socrates. He was 28 when the master died, and this tragic end of a quiet life left its mark on every phase of the pupil's thought. It filled him with such a scorn of democracy, such a hatred of the mob, as even his aristocratic lineage and breeding had hardly engendered in him. It led him to a catonic resolve that democracy must be destroyed, to be replaced by the rule of the wisest and the best. It became the absorbing problem of his life to find a method whereby the wisest and the best might be discovered, and then enabled and persuaded to rule. Meanwhile, his efforts to save Socrates had marked him out for suspicion by the democratic leaders. His friends urged that Athens was unsafe for him, that it was an admirably propitious moment for him to see the world. And so, in that year 399 BC, he set out. Where he went, we cannot for certain say. There is a merry war of the authorities for every turn of his route. He seems to have gone first to Egypt, and was somewhat shocked to hear from the priestly class which ruled that land that Greece was an infant state, without stabilizing traditions or profound culture, not yet therefore to be taken seriously by these sphinxly pundits of the Nile. But nothing so educates us as a shock. The memory of this learned caste, theocratically ruling a static agricultural people, remained alive in Plato's thought, and played its part in writing his Utopia. And then off he sailed to Sicily, and to Italy. There he joined for a time the school or sect which the great Pythagoras had founded. And once again his susceptible mind was marked with the memory of a small group of men set aside for scholarship and rule, living a plain life despite the possession of power. 12 years he wandered, imbibing wisdom from every source, sitting at every shrine, tasting every creed. Some would have it that he went to Judea and was molded for a while by the tradition of the almost socialistic prophets, and even that he found his way to the banks of the Ganges and learned the mystic meditations of the Hindus. We do not know. He returned to Athens in 387 BC, a man of 40 now, ripened to maturity by the variety of many peoples and the wisdom of many lands. He had lost a little of the hot enthusiasms of youth, but he had gained a perspective of thought in which every extreme was seen as a half-truth, and the many aspects of every problem blended into a distributive justice to every facet of the truth. He had knowledge and he had art, for once the philosopher and the poet lived in one soul, and he created for himself a medium of expression in which both beauty and truth might find room and play. The dialogue. Never before, we may believe, had philosophy assumed so brilliant a garb, and surely never since. Even in translation, this style shines and sparkles and leaps and bubbles over. Plato, says one of his lovers, Shelley, exhibits the rare union of close and subtle logic with the Pythian enthusiasm of poetry, melted by the splendor and harmony of his periods into one irresistible stream of musical impressions, which hurry the persuasions onward as in a breathless career. It was not for nothing that the young philosopher had begun as a dramatist. The difficulty in understanding Plato lies precisely in this intoxicating mixture of philosophy and poetry, of science and art. We cannot always tell in which character of the dialogue the author speaks, nor in which form, whether he is literal or speaks in metaphor, whether he jests or is in earnest. His love of jest and irony and myth leaves us at times baffled. Almost we could say of him that he did not speech except in parables. Shall I, as an older person, speak to you as younger men, in apologue or myth? Asks his protagonist. These dialogues, we are told, were written by Plato for the general reading public of his day. By their conversational method, their lively war of pros and cons, and their gradual development and frequent repetition of every important argument, they were explicitly adapted, obscure though they may seem to us now, to the understanding of the man who must taste philosophy as an occasional luxury, and who is compelled by the brevity of life to read as he who runs may read. Therefore, we must be prepared to find in these dialogues much that is playful and metaphorical, much that is unintelligible except to scholars learned in the social and literary minutiae of Plato's time, much that today will seem irrelevant and fanciful, but might well have served as the very sauce and flavor by which a heavy dish of thought was made digestible for minds unused to philosophic fare. Let us confess, too, that Plato has in sufficient abundance the qualities which he condemns. He inveighs against poets and their myths, and proceeds to add one to the number of poets and hundreds to the number of myths. He complains of the priests, who go about preaching hell and offering redemption from it for a consideration. But he himself is a priest, a theologian, a preacher, a super-moralist, a Savonarola denouncing art and inviting vanities to the fire. He acknowledges, Shakespeare-like, that comparisons are slippery, but he slips out of one into another and another and another. He condemns the sophists as phrase-mongering disputants, but he himself is not above chopping logic like a sophomore. Faguet parodies him. The whole is greater than the part? Surely. And the part is less than the whole? Yes. Therefore, clearly, philosophers should rule the state. What is that? It is evident. Let us go over it again. But this is the worst that we can say of him. And after it is said, the dialogues remain one of the priceless treasures of the world. The best of them, The Republic, is a complete treatise in itself, Plato reduced to a book. Here we shall find his metaphysics, his theology, his ethics, his psychology, his pedagogy, his politics, his theory of art. Here we shall find problems reeking with modernity and contemporary savor. Communism and socialism, feminism and birth control and eugenics, Nietzschean problems of morality and aristocracy, Rousseauian problems of return to nature and libertarian education, Bergsonian élan vital and Freudian psychoanalysis. Everything is here. It is a feast for the elite, served by an unstinting host. Plato is philosophy, and philosophy Plato, says Emerson, and awards to the Republic the words of Omar about the Quran. Burn the libraries, for their value is in this book. Let us study the Republic. The ethical problem. The discussion takes place in the house of Cephalus, a wealthy aristocrat. In the group are Glaucon and Adeimantus, brothers of Plato, and Thrasymachus, a gruff and excitable sophist. Socrates, who serves as the mouthpiece of Plato in the dialogue, asks Cephalus, "What do you consider to be the greatest blessing which you have reaped from wealth?" Cephalus answers that wealth is a blessing to him chiefly because it enables him to be generous and honest and just. Socrates, after his sly fashion, asks him just what he means by justice, and therewith lets loose the dogs of philosophic war. For nothing is so difficult as definitions, nor anything so severe a test and exercise of mental clarity and skill. Socrates finds it a simple matter to destroy one after another the definitions offered him, until at last Thrasymachus, less patient than the rest, breaks out with a roar. "What folly has possessed you, Socrates? And why do you others all drop down at one another's feet in this silly way? I say that if you want to know what justice is, you should answer, not ask, and shouldn't pride yourself on refuting others, for there are many who can ask, but cannot answer." Socrates is not frightened. He continues to ask rather than answer, and after a minute of parry and thrust, he provokes the unwary Thrasymachus to commit himself to a definition. "Listen, then," says the angry sophist. "I proclaim that might is right, and justice is the interest of the stronger. The different forms of government make laws, democratic, aristocratic, or autocratic, with a view to their respective interests, And these laws, so made by them to serve their interests, they deliver to their subjects as justice, and punish as unjust anyone who transgresses them. I am speaking of injustice on a large scale, and my meaning will be most clearly seen in autocracy, which by fraud and force takes away the property of others, not retail but wholesale. Now, when a man has taken away the money of the citizens and made slaves of them, then, instead of swindler and thief, he is called happy and blessed by all. For injustice is censured because those who censure it are afraid of suffering, and not from any scruple they might have of doing injustice themselves. This, of course, is the doctrine which our own day more or less correctly associates with the name of Nietzsche. Verily, I laughed many a time over the weaklings who thought themselves good because they had lame paws. Thus spake Zarathustra. Stirner expressed the idea briefly when he said that a handful of might is better than a bag full of right. Perhaps nowhere in the history of philosophy is the doctrine better formulated than by Plato himself in another dialogue, Gorgias, where the sophist Callicles denounces morality as an invention of the weak to neutralize the strength of the strong. They distribute praise and censure with a view to their own interests. They say that dishonesty is shameful and unjust, meaning by dishonesty the desire to have more than their neighbors. For knowing their own inferiority, they would be only too glad to have equality. But if there were a man who had sufficient force, enter the Superman, he would shake off and break through and escape from all this. He would trample underfoot all our formulas and spells and charms, and our laws that sin against nature. He who would truly live ought to allow his desires to wax to the uttermost. But when they have grown to their greatest, he should have courage and intelligence to minister to them, and to satisfy all his longings. And this I affirm to be natural justice and nobility. But the many cannot do this, and therefore they blame such persons because they are ashamed of their own inability, which they desire to conceal, and hence they call intemperance base. They enslave the nobler natures, and they praise justice only because they are cowards. This justice is a morality not for men but for footmen, udegar andros al andropodutinos. It is a slave morality, not a hero morality. The real virtues of a man are courage, Andrea, and intelligence, phronesis. Perhaps this hard immoralism reflects the development of imperialism in the foreign policy of Athens, and its ruthless treatment of weaker states. Your empire, said Pericles in the oration which Thucydides invents for him, is based on your own strength rather than the goodwill of your subjects. And the same historian reports the Athenian envoys coercing Melos into joining Athens in the war against Sparta. You know as well as we do that right, as the world goes, is only in question for equals in power. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. We have here the fundamental problem of ethics, the crux of the theory of moral conduct. What is justice? Shall we seek righteousness, or shall we seek power? Is it better to be good, or to be strong? How does Socrates, i.e. Plato, meet the challenge of this theory? At first, he does not meet it at all. He points out that justice is a relation among individuals, depending on social organization, and that in consequence it can be studied better as a part of the structure of a community than as a quality of personal conduct. If, he suggests, we can picture a just state, we shall be in a better position to describe a just individual. Plato excuses himself for this digression on the score that in testing a man's vision, we make him read first large type, then smaller. So, he argues, it is easier to analyze justice on a large scale than on the small scale of individual behavior. But we need not be deceived. In truth, the master is patching two books together and uses the argument as a sieve. He wishes not only to discuss the problems of personal morality, but the problems of social and political reconstruction as well. He has a utopia up his sleeve, and is resolved to produce it. It is easy to forgive him, for the digression forms the core and value of his book. The political problem. Justice would be a simple matter, says Plato, if men were simple. An anarchist communism would suffice. For a moment, he gives his imagination rein. First then, let us consider what will be their way of life. Will they not produce corn and wine and clothes and shoes and build houses for themselves? And when they are housed, they will work in summer commonly stripped and barefoot, but in winter substantially clothed and shod. They will feed on barley and wheat, baking the wheat and kneading the flour, making noble puddings and loaves. These they will serve up on a mat of reed or green leaves, themselves reclining the while upon beds of yew or myrtle boughs. And they and their children will feast, drinking of the wine which they have made, wearing garlands on their heads, and having the praises of the gods on their lips, living in sweet society, and having a care that their families do not exceed their means. For they will have an eye to poverty or war. Of course they will have a relish, salt and olives and cheese and onions and cabbages or other country herbs, which are fit for boiling. And we shall give them a dessert of figs and pulse and beans and myrtle berries and beech nuts, which they will roast at the fire, drinking in moderation. And with such a diet they may be expected to live in peace to a good old age, and bequeath a similar life to their children after them. Observe here the passing reference to the control of population, by infanticide, presumably, to vegetarianism, and to a return to nature, to the primitive simplicity which Hebrew legend pictures in the Garden of Eden. The whole has the sound of Diogenes the Cynic, who, as the epithet implied, thought we should turn and live with the animals. They are so placid and self-contained. And for a moment we are likely to classify Plato with Saint-Simon and Fourier and William Morris and Tolstoy. But he is a little more skeptical than these men of kindly faith. He passes quietly on to the question, why is it that such a simple paradise as he has described never comes? Why is it that these utopias never arrive upon the map? He answers, because of greed and luxury. Men are not content with a simple life. They are acquisitive, ambitious, competitive, and jealous. They soon tire of what they have and pine for what they have not. And they seldom desire anything unless it belongs to others. The result is the encroachment of one group upon the territory of another, the rivalry of groups for the resources of the soil, and then war. Trade and finance develop and bring new class divisions. Any ordinary city is in fact two cities, one the city of the poor, the other of the rich, each at war with the other. And in either division there are smaller ones. You would make a great mistake if you treated them as single states. A mercantile bourgeoisie arises, whose members seek social position through wealth and conspicuous consumption. They will spend large sums of money on their wives. These changes in the distribution of wealth produce political changes. As the wealth of the merchant overreaches that of the landowner, aristocracy gives way to a plutocratic oligarchy. Wealthy traders and bankers rule the state. Then statesmanship, which is the coordination of social forces and the adjustment of policy to growth, is replaced by politics, which is the strategy of party and the lust for the spoils of office. Every form of government tends to perish by excess of its basic principle. Aristocracy ruins itself by limiting too narrowly the circle within which power is confined. Oligarchy ruins itself by the incautious scramble for immediate wealth. In either case, the end is revolution. When revolution comes, it may seem to arise from little causes and petty whims. But though it may spring from slight occasions, it is the precipitate result of grave and accumulated wrongs. When a body is weakened by neglected ills, the merest exposure may bring serious disease. Then democracy comes. The poor overcome their opponents, slaughtering some and banishing the rest, and give to the people an equal share of freedom and power. But even democracy ruins itself by excess. Of democracy, its basic principle is the equal right of all to hold office and determine public policy. This is at first glance a delightful arrangement. It becomes disastrous because the people are not properly equipped by education to select the best rulers and the wisest courses. As to the people, they have no understanding, and only repeat what their rulers are pleased to tell them. To get a doctrine accepted or rejected, it is only necessary to have it praised or ridiculed in a popular play. A hit, no doubt, at Aristophanes, whose comedies attacked almost every new idea. Mob rule is a rough sea for the ship of state to ride. Every wind of oratory stirs up the waters and deflects the course. The upshot of such a democracy is tyranny or autocracy. The crowd so loves flattery, it is so hungry for honey, that at last the wiliest and most unscrupulous flatterer, calling himself the protector of the people, rises to supreme power. Consider the history of Rome. The more Plato thinks of it, the more astounded he is at the folly of leaving to mob caprice and gullibility the selection of political officials. Not to speak of leaving it to those shady and wealth-serving strategists who pull the oligarchic wires behind the democratic stage. Plato complains that whereas in simpler matters, like shoemaking, we think only a specially trained person will serve our purpose, in politics we presume that everyone who knows how to get votes knows how to administer a city or a state. When we are ill, we call for a trained physician, whose degree is a guarantee of specific preparation and technical competence. We do not ask for the handsomest physician, or the most eloquent one. Well then, when the whole state is ill, should we not look for the service and guidance of the wisest and the best? To devise a method of barring incompetence and knavery from public office, and of selecting and preparing the best to rule for the common good. That is the problem of political philosophy. The psychological problem. But behind these political problems lies the nature of man. To understand politics, we must unfortunately understand psychology. Like man, like state. Governments vary as the characters of men vary. States are made out of the human natures which are in them. The state is what it is because its citizens are what they are. Therefore, we need not expect to have better states until we have better men. Till then, all changes will leave every essential thing unchanged. How charming people are, always doctoring, increasing, and complicating their disorders, fancying they will be cured by some nostrum which somebody advises them to try, never getting better, but always growing worse. Are they not as good as a play, trying their hand at legislation and imagining that by reforms they will make an end to the dishonesties and rascalities of mankind, not knowing that in reality they are cutting away at the heads of a hydra? Let us examine for a moment the human material with which political philosophy must deal. Human behavior, says Plato, flows from three main sources: desire, emotion, and knowledge. Desire, appetite, impulse, instinct, these are one. Emotion, spirit, ambition, courage, these are one. Knowledge, thought, intellect, reason, these are one. Desire has its seat in the loins. It is a bursting reservoir of energy, fundamentally sexual. Emotion has its seat in the heart, in the flow and force of the blood. It is the organic resonance of experience and desire. Knowledge has its seat in the head. It is the eye of desire, and can become the pilot of the soul. These powers and qualities are all in all men, but in divers degrees. Some men are but the embodiment of desire, restless and acquisitive souls who are absorbed in material quests and quarrels, who burn with lust of luxuries and show, and who rate their gains always as naught compared with their ever-receding goals. These are the men who dominate and manipulate industry. But there are others who are temples of feeling and courage, who care not so much what they fight for, as for victory in and for itself. They are pugnacious rather than acquisitive. Their pride is in power rather than in possession. Their joy is on the battlefield rather than in the mart. These are the men who make the armies and navies of the world. And last are the few whose delight is in meditation and understanding, who yearn not for goods, nor for victory, but for knowledge, who leave both market and battlefield to lose themselves in the quiet clarity of secluded thought, whose will is a light rather than a fire, whose haven is not power but truth. These are the men of wisdom, who stand aside unused by the world. Now, just as effective individual action implies that desire, though warmed with emotion, is guided by knowledge, so in the perfect state, the industrial forces would produce, but they would not rule. The military forces would protect, but they would not rule. The forces of knowledge and science and philosophy would be nourished and protected, and they would rule. Unguided by knowledge, the people are a multitude without order, like desires in disarray. The people need the guidance of philosophers as desires need the enlightenment of knowledge. Ruin comes when the trader, whose heart is lifted up by wealth, becomes ruler, or when the general uses his army to establish a military dictatorship. The producer is at his best in the economic field. The warrior is at his best in battle. They are both at their worst in public office. And in their crude hands, politics submerges statesmanship. For statesmanship is a science and an art. One must have lived for it and been long prepared. Only a philosopher king is fit to guide a nation. Until philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and wisdom and political leadership meet in the same man, cities will never cease from ill, nor the human race. This is the keystone of the arch of Plato's thought. The psychological solution. Well then, what is to be done? We must begin by sending out into the country all the inhabitants of the city who are more than 10 years old, and by taking possession of the children, who will thus be protected from the habits of their parents. We cannot build utopia with young people corrupted at every turn by the example of their elders. We must start, so far as we can, with a clean slate. It is quite possible that some enlightened ruler will empower us to make such a beginning with some part or colony of his realm. One ruler did, as we shall see. In any case, we must give to every child, and from the outset, full equality of educational opportunity. There is no telling where the light of talent or genius will break out. We must seek it impartially everywhere, in every rank and race. The first turn on our road is universal education. For the first 10 years of life, education shall be predominantly physical. Every school is to have a gymnasium and a playground. Play and sport are to be the entire curriculum. And in this first decade, such health will be stored up as will make all medicine unnecessary. To require the help of medicine, because by lives of indolence and luxury men have filled themselves like pools with waters and winds, flatulence and catarrh, is not this a disgrace? Our present system of medicine may be said to educate diseases, to draw them out into a long existence, rather than to cure them. But this is an absurdity of the idle rich. When a carpenter is ill, he asks the physician for a rough and ready remedy, an emetic, or a purge, or cautery, or the knife. And if anyone tells him that he must go through a course of dietetics, and swathe and swaddle his head, and all that sort of thing, he replies at once that he has no time to be ill, and that he sees no good in a life that is spent in nursing his disease to the neglect of his ordinary calling. And therefore, saying goodbye to this sort of physicians, he resumes his customary diet and either gets well and lives and does his business, or if his constitution fails, he dies and has done with it. We cannot afford to have a nation of malingerers and invalids. Utopia must begin in the body of man. But mere athletics and gymnastics would make a man too one-sided. How shall we find a gentle nature which has also great courage? For they seem to be inconsistent with each other. We do not want a nation of prize fighters and weightlifters. Perhaps music will solve our problem. Through music, the soul learns harmony and rhythm, and even a disposition to justice. For can he who is harmoniously constituted ever be unjust? Is not this, Glaucon, why musical training is so powerful? Because rhythm and harmony find their way into the secret places of the soul, bearing grace in their movements and making the soul graceful? Music molds character, and therefore shares in determining social and political issues. Damon tells me, and I can quite believe it, that when modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state change with them. Music is valuable not only because it brings refinement of feeling and character, but also because it preserves and restores health. There are some diseases which can be treated only through the mind. So the Corybantic priest treated hysterical women with wild pipe music, which excited them to dance and dance till they fell to the ground exhausted and went to sleep. When they awoke, they were cured. The unconscious sources of human thought are touched and soothed by such methods. And it is in these substrata of behavior and feeling that genius sinks its roots. No man, when conscious, attains to true or inspired intuition, but rather when the power of intellect is fettered in sleep or by disease or dementia. The prophet, Montique, or genius, is akin to the madman, Maniche. Plato passes on to a remarkable anticipation of psychoanalysis. Our political psychology is perplexed, he argues, because we have not adequately studied the various appetites or instincts of man. Dreams may give us a clue to some of the subtle and more elusive of these dispositions. Certain of the unnecessary pleasures and instincts are deemed to be unlawful. Every man appears to have them, but in some persons they are subjected to the control of law and reason, sublimated. And the better desires prevailing over them, they are either wholly suppressed or reduced in strength and number, while in other persons these desires are stronger and more abundant. I mean particularly those desires which are awake when the reasoning and taming and ruling power, censor, of the personality is asleep. The wild beast in our nature, gorged with meat and drink, starts up and walks about naked and surfeits at his will. And there is no conceivable folly or crime, however shameless or unnatural, not excepting incest or parricide, Oedipus complex, of which such a nature may not be guilty. But when a man's pulse is healthy and temperate, and he goes to sleep cool and rational, having indulged his appetites neither too much nor too little, but just enough to lay them to sleep, he is then least likely to be the sport of fanciful and lawless visions. In all of us, even in good men, there is such a latent wild beast nature which peers out in sleep. Music and measure lend grace and health to the soul and to the body. But again, too much music is as dangerous as too much athletics. To be merely an athlete is to be nearly a savage, and to be merely a musician is to be melted and softened beyond what is good. The two must be combined, and after 16, the individual practice of music must be abandoned, though choral singing, like communal games, will go on throughout life. Nor is music to be merely music. It must be used to provide attractive forms for the sometimes unappetizing contents of mathematics, history, and science. There is no reason why, for the young, these difficult studies should not be smoothed into verse and beautified with song. Even then, these studies are not to be forced upon an unwilling mind. Within limits, a libertarian spirit must prevail. The elements of instruction should be presented to the mind in childhood, but not with any compulsion. For a freeman should be a freeman too in the acquisition of knowledge. Knowledge which is acquired under compulsion has no hold on the mind. Therefore, do not use compulsion, but let early education be rather a sort of amusement. This will better enable you to find out the natural bent of the child. With minds so freely growing and bodies made strong by sport and outdoor life of every kind, our ideal state would have a firm psychological and physiological base, broad enough for every possibility and every development. But a moral basis must be provided as well. The members of the community must make a unity. They must learn that they are members of one another, that they owe to one another certain amenities and obligations. Now, since men are by nature acquisitive, jealous, combative, and erotic, how shall we persuade them to behave themselves? By the policeman's omnipresent club? It is a brutal method, costly and irritating. There is a better way, and that is by lending to the moral requirements of the community the sanction of supernatural authority. We must have a religion. Plato believes that a nation cannot be strong unless it believes in God. A mere cosmic force, or first cause, or élan vital, that was not a person, could barely inspire hope, or devotion, or sacrifice. It could not offer comfort to the hearts of the distressed, nor courage to embattled souls. But a living God can do all this, and can stir or frighten the self-seeking individualist into some moderation of his greed, some control of his passion. All the more so if to belief in God is added belief in personal immortality. The hope of another life gives us courage to meet our own death, and to bear with the death of our loved ones. We are twice armed if we fight with faith. Granted that none of the beliefs can be demonstrated, that God may be after all only the personified ideal of our love and our hope, and and that the soul is like the music of the lyre, and dies with the instrument that gave it form. Yet surely, so runs the argument, Pascal-like, of the Phaedo, it will do us no harm to believe, and it may do us and our children immeasurable good.
Seems to be a bit glitched.
For we are likely to have trouble with these children of ours if we undertake to explain and justify everything to their simple minds. We shall have an especially hard time when they arrive at the age of 20 and face the first scrutiny and test of what they have learned in all their years
I'll be right
of
back.
equal education. Then will come a ruthless weeding out, the great elimination, we might call it. That test will be no mere academic examination. It will be practical as well as theoretical. There shall also be toils and pains and conflicts prescribed for them. Every kind of ability will have a chance to show itself, and every sort of stupidity will be hunted out into the light. Those who fail will be assigned to the economic work of the nation. They will be businessmen and clerks and factory workers and farmers. The test will be impartial and impersonal. Whether one is to be a farmer or a philosopher will be determined not by monopolized opportunity or nepotic favoritism. The selection will be more democratic than democracy. Those who pass this first test will receive 10 more years of education and training in body and mind and character. And then they will face a second test, far severer than the first. Those who fail will become the auxiliaries or executive aides and military officers of the state. Now it is just in these great eliminations that we shall need every resource of persuasion to get the eliminated to accept their fate with their vanity and